Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Miguel Javier Lor Paredes, and I am one of the regional research managers coordinators for Project Oasis, a project led by SembraMedia. In case you're not familiar with SembraMedia, we're a nonprofit organization based in Latin America that works to strengthen media entrepreneurs in independent digital media so that they can develop sustainable business models that enable high quality journalism with editorial independence. Sembra Media was founded in 2015. We started mapping Spanish language native digital media outlets, leading us to build our first media directory to better understand their challenges and opportunities for doing digital journalism in Latin America. Since 2020, we expanded our research efforts into other regions, including Europe and North America, and today we continue to do so in other parts of the world. Project Oasis is a research effort to map independent digital media organizations, news creators, and publishers in exile in more than 65 countries. Today, we're excited to share the latest findings from Project Oasis with a focus on Australia and New Zealand, alongside the updated version of our media directory featuring media organizations from these two countries. We aim to share additional insights and open new conversations about what media entrepreneurship and sustainability mean for the future of independent digital media in other parts of the world. In today's session, I will share a brief presentation of our research in Australia and New Zealand, followed by a panel discussion featuring leaders from across these two digital media ecosystems. We'll explore what is driving the growth of independent digital media, how these organizations are building sustainable business models, and what challenges and opportunities lie ahead for this region in the Asia Pacific. We'll also make some time for a Q&A, and my colleague Lila Bujanic, who is joining us today from Belgrade, will moderate the chat, so feel free to submit your questions throughout the session. Before we start with today's panel, I would like to give the floor to Arun Venkataraman, who's the global lead for emerging news voices and industry research for Google News Initiative. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today due to the large difference with his time zone, but he has kindly sent us a video to share some additional details on their collaboration with Project Oasis.
Hi, folks. My name is Arun Venkataraman. I lead our global work with emerging news voices and industry research at the Google News Initiative, based here in New York City. We are so excited for the expansion of Project Oasis to Australia and New Zealand. As some of you may be aware, the Google News Initiative has been the primary supporter for Project Oasis since its launch in 2020. And in an ecosystem that's changed so quickly, where there are so many new entrants, we believe Project Oasis has been invaluable to identifying digital native news organizations and news creators that adhere to journalistic guidelines and make important contributions to the news ecosystem. We have seen digital native news organizations and news creators play an increasingly important role in that ecosystem. Many provide journalism on topics or communities that have been historically underserved. Many have been engaging and reaching new, often younger audiences. So, bringing attention to those news organizations and their work is absolutely crucial, we believe, to ensuring that the broader ecosystem, including Google, can provide these organizations with the support they need to continue growing and, most importantly, fulfill their mission. I wanted to quickly share some of the ways we're specifically looking to support that work in Australia and New Zealand. In addition to the expansion of Project Oasis to Australia and New Zealand this year, we'll also be running a News Creators Lab with FT Strategies that's focused on emerging news voices across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacifics. We'll expand trainings we've offered through our GNI trainers in the region on Google's AI products and audience and revenue tools to include emerging news organizations. Later on this year, we'll be hosting a hackathon for emerging news organizations where participants can learn directly from Google's AI experts and build custom tools that aim to solve specific business growth challenges. And finally, we'll continue to conduct additional research across Asia Pacific to more deeply understand the needs of this growing segment and how Google can help address them. We are so grateful to the work of the Project Oasis team to deepen our understanding of this increasingly important emerging part of the news ecosystem. And we're excited to continue to elevate our engagement with digital natives and news creators across the region this year. So, with that, I'll turn it back over to the Project Oasis team.
Thanks again, Arun, for sharing more information on how we're collaborating with Google News Initiative on this project. And as I have previously mentioned, Project Oasis is a global research initiative led by SembraMedia and supported by Google News Initiative. And we have mapped more than 3,000 news media organizations from more than 65 countries, including Australia and New Zealand, which we have officially launched 2 weeks ago. Of course, we couldn't do this alone. We work with international partners to create a public database and generate evidence on how these media organizations start, grow, and sustain themselves. Here, I want to acknowledge the ongoing support and collaboration by the Local and Independent News Association, LINA, and the Digital Publishers Alliance, DPA, in Australia, which has brought me here today to share the results of our work over the last year, along with our promotional partners across the world. Over the past year, we expanded our work by mapping independent digital media in Australia and New Zealand and published a short report on our main findings. This adds an important region to our global picture, and the full report is live now, and you can access it through our website. Now, when we look at the data globally, a few patterns stand out. First of all, growth in digital media outlets started around 2014. This growth hit a peak in 2020, the same year of the pandemic. In terms of financial health, we have found that the sweet spot is between 2 to 6 revenue sources, which are regularly diversified but focused. Editorially, most independent digital media outlets focus on social issues and human rights, and instead of paywalls, there's a significant shift towards memberships and donations. Emails emerges as one of the most effective ways to build direct relationships with audiences. What we found is that Australia and New Zealand reflect many of the same global patterns. There's a similar peak in media creation around 2020 and a strong reliance on diversified revenue. Editorial priorities and audience strategies also align closely with global trends. And at the same time, there are important differences. Some of these differences are the following. We have noted a high rate of digital media covering local news, and the diversity of the language they are using to share information is helping to fill news gaps in areas often underserved by major national outlets. There is as much a stronger commercial orientation, with most outlets operating as for-profit orientations. There's also less dependence to international philanthropic funding, which increases reliance on domestic markets. As a result, the main challenge here is economic sustainability. Sorry, that's my daughter in the background. As you can all understand that she's playing around here. But going back to this point, this increases reliance on domestic markets when I'm referring to the less dependence on international philanthropic funding. One of the main challenges here in Australia then is economic sustainability rather than physical or legal threats, as we have previously found in Latin America. All of this research is accessible through our global directory, and it allows users to explore independent media across regions, understand their models, and identify trends in an interactive way. This tool is designed for research, but also for collaboration, visibility, and ecosystem building. All of this gives us a broad picture of how independent media ecosystems are evolving, both globally and in this region. But to really understand what these trends look like in practice, it is essential to hear directly from the people building and supporting these organizations on the ground. So now I would like to invite our panelists to join the conversation. First, I am about to introduce Claire, who joined Lina as their executive director in 2022. After a 20-year career in media policy, stakeholder engagement, policy development, and communications. She previously worked in policy and stakeholder engagement for First Nations Media Australia, the big national body for nations, not-for-profit broadcasting, media and communications. And Claire has held senior management roles with the Community Broadcasting Foundation, ran her own media agency, worked in street press publications, and has been an active broadcaster and board member at community radio stations, including ongoing volunteer roles at PBS in Melbourne. And she has a fantastic show, which I cannot recommend enough. Claire, thanks again for your support over the last year. Would you like to greet the audience today?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the generous introduction, Miguel, and thanks for listening to my radio show. It's great to be here, and we've appreciated the partnership with SembraMedia and the opportunity to input to your mapping process. It's been great to see the way this has come together and to contribute from the Australian market to your global project.
Thank you, Claire. Now I would like to welcome Margie Barry, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for The Conversation, a media organization that brings together academics and journalists. Margie joined The Conversation in 2023. She has 20 years of experience in advertising, marketing, and consulting, specializing in audience growth and reader revenue. She's an alumna of the Marketing Academy, holds a mini MBA in brand management, and a full MBA specializing in business for social and environmental impact from the University of New South Wales. She was previously the marketing director of Guardian Australia and volunteer board member for environmental cooperative The Bower. Margie, it was great to meet you in person a few days ago at Linus Annual Summit. How are you feeling today, and where are you joining us from today?
Thanks, Miguel. Hi, everyone. I'm joining from Sydney. Our head office for The Conversation is actually in Melbourne, but I work in Sydney on the lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm on the Black Sand region around Botany Bay. And this is a region where I think traditionally Indigenous peoples would gather in times of plentiful resources and share knowledge through storytelling. And I always like to think about that when I'm doing my work for The Conversation, because that's exactly what we aim to do, is to take the knowledge from the experts and share it with as many people as possible, so that, you know, everybody can make better informed decisions about not just what's going on in politics, but just in your everyday life as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Margie, for that wonderful introduction. Now, our next guest is Mark Phillips. He's the founder of Brunswick Voice, a hyper-local news organization in Melbourne's inner northern suburbs. Launched as a blog during the 2021 COVID lockdowns in response to the closure of all local media outlets. Project Oasis has grown to be a trusted source of local news and information with a website and a quarterly newspaper with a circulation of 5,000 copies. Mark has been a print journalist for more than 30 years for a range of national, metropolitan, regional, and local newspapers. How are you today, Mark? We have been following your work, and it's great to have you here today as one of Lina's members and a relevant case of hyperlocal media in Australia. Would you like to say hi?
Yeah, I feel very honoured to have been invited. I feel very honoured to have been invited along today as a bit of a representative of what's hopefully going to be a long-term and sustainable sector of the news media in Australia, which is the hyperlocal independent digital first publishers. And I'm just joining you today from Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne. And as Brunswick Voice is a very small operation, I'm just in the spare room in our house, which is basically doubling up as an office.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark, again for that introduction. Now, moving forward, I would like to welcome one of our regional research managers for Project Oasis. Her name is Sanne Bramer, who is the founder of Inclusive Journalism. And she's also a global media strategist, trainer, coach, and researcher. And she helps journalists, storytellers, and leaders apply decolonial media practices, explore positionality, and craft narratives that challenge the status quo. She has worked with SembraMedia since 2022 as a research manager, and also worked with Solutions Insights Lab and the Thomson Reuters Foundation, following a decade in senior roles at the Dutch national public broadcaster. Dutch with Frisian roots, she splits her time between Europe and Southeast Asia. Welcome, Sanne. Would you like to greet the audience today?
Yeah, thank you so much for including me in this panel. I've been working with Miguel for a couple of years already and very proud to be part of Global Project Oasis. And together with my colleague Leila, who's also in this webinar, we've been mapping the European landscape. And I've been involved in the African research as well that we hope to publish in the coming weeks. So yeah, super exciting to also hear more insights from Australia and New Zealand. So thank you, Miguel.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Sanne, for joining us from Amsterdam today. Now let's go back to this region, and I would like to now welcome Sarah Shatamasevi, who was our researcher in New Zealand. She's a journalist working across Stop Press and New Zealand Marketing Magazine, who loves bringing the news and views of the industry to life, both in print and online. She's also a martial arts instructor, and more specifically, a black belt teaching Kung Fu. How are you today, Sarah?
Kia ora, Miguel. Kia ora, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on the panel. It's been a great pleasure to be involved with this project. I feel like I've learned so much about the local industry and local media in New Zealand. I'm calling in today from Auckland in New Zealand. But yeah, I think it's really added to my career and my understanding of what the media ecosystem looks like here as well. And I think anything that's looking at media sustainability can only be a good thing. So yeah, awesome work, and I'm so super pleased to be here.
Thanks again, Sarah, for joining us today. Everybody for being part of this panel. So let's get started. I would like to first invite Mark from Brunswick Voice to kickstart our conversation. Since our Project Oasis report about Australia and New Zealand has shown that 43% of independent digital media organizations in the first of these countries, Australia, focus on local and hyper-local coverage. Mark, I would like to ask you, what does that tell us about why these outlets exist, and what would communities lose without them?
Well, if I tell the story about how I started Brunswick Voice, it was basically because the region, or the part of Melbourne that I live in, had been abandoned by mainstream legacy media. There used to be up to 3 local newspapers delivered every week, and one by one they pulled out, and the final straw was during COVID when News Corp shut down their local publishing arm. So that just left us with a total news desert in this part of Melbourne. And so after about a year, I just felt that there was a need to provide some kind of service to people in the area, prompted by my own desire to know what was going on in my own local area as much as anything else. So I think the reason why there is such a high proportion of hyper-local publications is just the same story. That communities have been abandoned by legacy publishers, and people are stepping in to fill the breach. And I think, you don't have to look at the homepages of any news outlet around the world at the moment, or in Australia in particular. It's dominated by global news. It's dominated by whatever the latest utterance from Donald Trump is. But when it comes to finding out what's going on in your local neighbourhood around the corner from where you live, there's a real dearth of information. So that's why there's this whole movement of local publishers emerging in Australia and around the world to fill that information gap, and also just to rebuild our communities, because local newspapers always provided a real connection for a community. They bound communities together. They give you a platform to celebrate your community and to introduce people to things that you're doing. And I don't think social media is really doing the job there. It's in fact, social media is probably doing the opposite these days. It's causing division and conflict. So I suppose they're the two primary reasons. Is people want information. They want information at a local level, and they want to see their community reflected back at them, and they want to contribute to that.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, very inspiring work. And being a local in Brunswick, one of the suburbs that you cover, it shows how invaluable local independent media are for the social fabric of this community, but also more broadly, how important they are for democratic societies. Moving forward, Claire, the data shows that 88% of Australian independent media organizations are for profit. This data point is higher than the global Project Oasis average of 60%. Claire, what does that say about how sustainability works here in Australia, and where are the biggest gaps you're still seeing?
Thanks, Miguel. I think what that data reflects is the different legislative environment that we're operating here in Australia by comparison to other jurisdictions around the world. Public interest journalism is not actually recognised as a public good in our Charities Act here in Australia, whereas it is in other jurisdictions. So a lot of newsrooms start their operations as a website in a for-profit space because there's really no incentive for them to do the additional reporting work of registering as a not-for-profit, where they don't have access to things like, or in Australia, the deductible gift recipient status or some of the other tax benefits that come with registering as a not-for-profit. In saying that, I would say that a lot of the small newsrooms in particular that we're working with here in Australia do approach it with really with a not-for-profit mindset. They're generally community-minded individuals that are trying to be of service to their communities. So the motivations and the catalyst for doing the work that they're doing in many cases very much aligns with the not-for-profit models, but the legislative environment doesn't offer really much opportunity to register as a not-for-profit in the same way as it's easy enough to set up your business as a for-profit. So that's something that Lena is working on around trying to get that recognition within the legislation and try to make that a space where we can actually build a not-for-profit news sector here in Australia in a way that could potentially attract philanthropic donations. At the moment, a lot of that income really needs to be funneled through other charities like Lena or some of the not-for-profit newsrooms that do exist. And we would like to see certainly more investment from philanthropy in that space. But at the moment, the legislation really doesn't support that in the same way as it does in other jurisdictions around the world. So I think that's why you're seeing that difference between the actual model, the business structure model, I suppose, more so than the actual work that those publishers are doing.
And I would like to acknowledge that Lena is doing a fantastic job in bringing together independent journalists across Australia and exploring not only those needs, but also growth opportunities for everyone who are part of this market, which we will also discuss further in the upcoming questions throughout the session. Thanks again, Claire, for raising that concern as well and some of the opportunities that may arise. Now, Margie, our report also points out that display advertising is still the dominant revenue source for Australian digital media, but the conversation has had to think differently about that. In fact, you are a non-profit organization bringing together academics and journalists. So what are the lessons your revenue journey might be transferable to smaller independent outlets in other countries?
Thank you. Yeah, the conversation has been described as the best Aussie startup that no one's heard of. And that's because it did come from an original business idea. So the conversation was founded in 2011. And at this time, we could already see that the display advertising model was breaking. Many publishers were having to compromise on quality to chase the clicks to satisfy the scale that was demanded by advertising. And this was driving a sort of race to the bottom in terms of quality journalism. And the conversation founders saw this crisis as an opportunity to think differently. And they created a business model for, it's a member-funded business model, but the members are not readers, they are the academic institutions. So this model was designed to sort of protect us from this trap of digital advertising. About 30% of our funding comes from our universities, and every year they pay an annual fee, and that means that their academics can write for the conversation. There are several benefits to this model. Firstly, it means we don't have to compromise quality to chase clicks. We don't have to publish clickbait, but also we don't have to compromise reader experience. So you'll see there's no ads actually on our website. We just run ads in our newsletters. Secondly, it means there's less financial risk for the organization when the ad market fluctuates, which it can do dramatically, like we saw in COVID. Thirdly, it means that we can pick and choose which advertisers do sponsor our content. So we take ads from member organizations, but also from other like-minded organizations who we think have a product or a service that our audience will be interested in. And that means that the ads actually add value rather than detract from the reader experience. And finally, probably most importantly for the staff, it means there's no internal conflict between the the commercial teams and the editorial teams, because all our revenue streams support the editorial mission of providing the highest quality content. Now, I don't want to suggest that everyone should replicate this model. It's obviously going to be very hard for anybody else to do that. But hopefully, by sharing the success of this little Aussie startup, it might inspire other people to innovate in their business model, not just in their content types, to test out new models of funding, independent journalism.
Fantastic, Margie. Such an interesting model you have achieved with the conversation in Australia and internationally, which we will discuss. Also about this approach to your organization in upcoming questions. Now, moving on to Sarah. Let's turn our attention to New Zealand. And she led our research in this country, the research efforts in New Zealand. So what was the thing that surprised you the most, and what did you find on the ground in New Zealand, Sarah?
Yeah, great question. I've been thinking about it quite a lot since the project has wrapped up. I think the main things that surprised me were having, I guess, thoughts that I already had kind of confirmed, but then also seeing the true extent. So the fact that New Zealand has a small media ecosystem has long been, it's long been talked about as being a fact since I went to journalism school in 2018. And I think actually doing the mapping really showed, as you saw from the numbers, just how small it actually is. And I find that interesting in particular because New Zealand is quite an innovative country. And so the fact that we're kind of, there's only 21 that we were able to map for the country, it kind of speaks to, is there just a lack of people creating media startups, or does it speak to wider issues around like just funding in general, lack of people kind of going through the pipeline to become journalists, going overseas in response to job cuts and loss of funding and that sort of thing? Or is it actually just a visibility issue in the sense that some of these, maybe there were more outlets out there, but they're just hard to find, or they're so small that they're not showing up online? I think it was a struggle that there wasn't kind of a central, a kind of a one source of truth that we could go to be like, whereas, who are the media organizations of note or of decent size that we could look to? The two kind of main ones in New Zealand are, they're trying to be digital first now, but they are they're still tied to masthead sort of publications, and they're not independently owned either. So those are the kind of two main media outlets currently in the country. And I think the other thing that surprised me was contacting people was harder than I expected. And I think I knew it would be as someone who works in the industry and is constantly busy with an inbox full of emails, but kind of actually making contact and then getting things over the line was a lot harder than I expected. But it was surprising and not, in the sense that I totally understand, because everybody is super busy and probably just didn't have the resource and the capacity. The final two things are that niches are quite strong, and this is something I kind of had a sense for, but then doing the mapping really showed that there is a kind of strong tendency towards niche outlets that specialize in a certain thing, and a kind of sense of loyalty towards them, kind of more so than potentially the mainstream sort of media. And then those, and in the same vein, those kind of specialist and niche outlets have strong desires to remain free to access, or have a without having a paywall, but have some sort of membership structure to drive revenue, but without that membership allows them extra perks without actually blocking off the content as well. So I found that a really interesting way of kind of navigating the revenue challenges that both New Zealand and Australia are kind of challenged with.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that insight. I believe it's a common pattern across some of the previous contributions that trust is one of the most valuable assets for most of these media organizations, and the importance of building community within those media entrepreneurs, right? I think that's the aim of this project and the work that we are all doing in favor of media ecosystems. Thanks, Sarah. Now, I want to invite my colleague, Sane Bramer, to share her input from what we have also learned across regions. In regards to that, Sane, when you compare Australia and New Zealand with regions like Europe and Africa, what stands out to you as the biggest difference in what independent digital media actually need to survive?
Thank you, Miguel. And so interesting to hear the others speak. We do have the conversation also in the European landscape. And I didn't know it was an Aussie startup. So this is new to me as well. But thank you for the question. What stands out if you look at the trends more globally is that, for example, we do have a big percentage of for-profit in the global research. The Australian New Zealand research peaks it, I think, with more than 80% even. And globally, we see that it's around 60%. But what also the other regions have in common is that there is a diversification in revenue that is really key everywhere. So I think these smaller, it's not always smaller, but often smaller media organizations notice that diversification of revenue is needed in order to survive. I see in New Zealand, Australia, a challenge in more economic sustainability, where in other regions we also see more challenges in, for example, political pressure, legal restrictions. I learned from also working in Southeast Asia that SLAPs are a thing in that region as well. But in Europe, we found that the threat of SLAPs are quite big for these smaller media. And so, yeah, they need to be careful also on reporting on sensitive issues. And then in Africa, where we're finalizing the research, we see a strong growth and many new outlets emerging, also with the peak in the pandemic years, so to say, the COVID-19 years. But there's also more precarity. So there's more financial instability. There's not, money comes and goes, and it's often very hard to plan in the long term, but there's also limits in infrastructure. For example, internet access, even though it's widely spread now, but there are still energy cutoffs now and then. And that makes it hard sometimes to reach audiences and also make money because you can't always give the continuity that is needed for that. And then in the African research, what is also interesting, and that is primarily media in English and French language, and the indigenous languages are far less represented. So that's also an interesting observation, especially for a continent like Africa. So in general, in sustainability, you can see that the conditions in which these independent media survive and exist are really different around the globe, around the regions. Even within Europe, we saw a lot of differences as well. So I'm from the Netherlands, so in the northwestern part of Europe has quite a good landscape of and support system of grants, for example, whereas through the mapping of Europe, I also learned that a region like Southern Europe has far less access to grants, and then Central Eastern Europe as well. So there's also inequality within the boundaries of the region. So yeah, the same model doesn't fail everywhere for the same reason, doesn't succeed everywhere for the same reason. And it also maybe raises questions for Australia, New Zealand, as what these outlets can learn from other regions. So, and I hope that with Global Project Oasis, we also contribute as SembraMedia also with the interconnections between the regions and the I'd say knowledge exchange.
Very valuable insights. Thanks, Sani, for sharing some details. And we will continue some of this, expanding some of these insights on the months ahead when we update Project Oasis Media Directory with data from Africa and India. And I would also like to thank everyone for joining us this session so far. We'll have some time at the end of this panel for you to ask questions directly to the panelists through the chat. And my colleague Lila is collecting some of those questions through the chat if you would like to submit those. Now, back to Margie from the conversation. I would like to ask, what are the conditions that have allowed the conversation to scale their operations to other countries?
Thanks, that is a great question. Well, there's three main reasons that we've been able to scale internationally. Firstly, the conversation was set up as an education organization. As Claire has already referred to, we had to get around the restriction for media getting charitable status. So as an education organization, we could get our tax deductible status, so we can benefit from donations and gifts from, large gifts from philanthropic donors. And these large gifts are really helpful in enabling you to scale quickly. And that also meant it provided a model that made it easier for us to sort of set up in the US as well, because in the US, non-profit news is much better established already. And once we had got a foothold from Australia into the US, then it's much easier to expand around the rest of the world. And now we have 11 editions. Secondly, we really benefited from the open web era. Because we had the trusted.edu domain, Google and Meta sent us like a fire hose of traffic that really helped us prove our scale quickly and then attract more funding. And even now, we're still benefiting from that. While other publishers are saying they're seeing their Google traffic dropping, we're actually seeing ours growing because the Google algorithm is prioritizing expertise and all our articles are written by academic experts. So by staying true to our values and our principles, we're still seeing that global expansion through the open web. And then finally, I think probably most importantly for other publishers to kind of take on as a lesson perhaps, is that the problem we were designed to solve was not just an Australian problem, it was a global problem. And that was that universities were seeing their research, which is their bread and butter, right? But it was being locked behind paywalls in academic journals. And we offered a bridge between the academic information and the general public. And this problem is something that universities around the world face. All universities they're hungry to share their research and to generate, huge impact from their research. So although Australia was our launch pad, it sort of created a template which was then easy to roll out to any other country where there is, a decent university sector.
Thank you, Maggie, for sharing that approach. And again, you have found a very specific niche, but on a global scale, which is fascinating to hear about. And I believe that this is something that could be also replicated by other media outlets across the world. And this is something that we are trying to learn from the Australian ecosystem as well. And this takes us as well to what are the particular conditions in this market. And that takes me to Claire to ask her what the local conditions are. And as we have seen, it's primarily profit-driven compared to other regions. So in that sense, advertising remains the primary revenue source for many Australian digital media outlets. Claire, what opportunities do you see in advertising technology that could help independent publishers compete more effectively?
Miguel, I wish I had a silver bullet to share with you about the advertising revenue model, but I think there is a heavy reliance on advertising revenue in Australia, and particularly by comparison to other parts of the world. So we get that feedback quite a lot when I'm speaking to publishers in different spaces, and the advertising journey is really different for each publisher. And we just heard from Margie around kind of some of the parameters that the conversation use around their advertising. I guess our role at Lena is really to try to help newsrooms facilitate advertising in a way that is actually manageable, particularly for very small teams. And so in terms of tech, at the moment we have a partnership with an organization called Broad Street, who are a US-based tech company that they actually was started by Kenny Katzgrau, who is a publisher himself. It's fairly low lift in terms of implementation on websites, and allows publishers quite a lot of flexibility to develop their own products. And in saying that, it also allows for some things that are a bit out of the box in terms of advertising. So rather than, obviously it has display advertising like the banners and things that you would expect, but it also has features like there's a feature on there called Local Expert, for example, where you might sell a space that highlights a particular service industry that's in your region and those sorts of things. And people start to become a little bit competitive about wanting to be seen as the local expert in the way that that advertising is framed. So we found there are things like that that are working for some publishers, particularly in the local setting here in Australia. And in terms of what we're doing with Lena, we are trying to build a collective advertising model, which is taking a little bit of time and something that is piecing together bit by bit at the moment. But we've found Broad Street to be a relatively affordable entry-level piece of tech in terms of managing advertising. And a lot of the publishers that we work with really want something that isn't going to be overly complex and time-consuming, because they want to be spending the most of their time actually reporting the news. And particularly for people who are working in either by themselves or in very small teams, we've been really conscious of people trying to sell advertising models that don't require kind of daily maintenance and things as well, and that they can actually manage in their workflows. And so far, Broad Street's been the lead one, but there are other programs like Ad Butler and different things like that that will do similar types of things.
Wonderful. Very interesting, Claire. Just a follow-up question about this program. Is this open only to Lena members, or can anyone write to the organization to ask more about their current projects?
Oh, look, Broad Street itself is it's a commercial product that anybody can purchase, so that you can go to that website and use their service in any way. We have a relationship with the organization where we have what's known as a parent account that any of the Lena members can access. So Lena members at the moment can use that service for free through their Lena membership. But outside of that, publishers also can work directly with Broad Street if they'd like to.
Great. Thanks, Claire, for sharing more details on your work with Lena. And moving forward, I would like to return to Mark, the Brunswick Voices editor, who works largely with volunteers and no paywall. And I would like to ask, how do you make that model work? And is there any advice that you would like to give to other hyperlocal media editors who are trying to do the same, but with very limited resources?
Well, I sort of feel like I'm here a bit under false pretenses, because I'm not sure if Brunswick Voice is a great success, but we're still around. It's been going for 5 years, so it must be doing something right. I think, one of the most important things is just to be really focused on your community and just to keep your ambitions in check, and don't be worried about being super local, because there's such a niche there and such a thirst for local news. And being in the community itself just generates a huge amount of goodwill. So that can attract volunteers who have been really helpful to Brunswick Voice. And an example of that is, sort of a byproduct of that is when we're a digital first publication, but when we first wanted to print our first newspaper, we had to raise the money to actually pay for the printing, and we just used the community, basically crowdsourced from the community, to cover those costs for the first edition until we could generate the advertising to cover the costs themselves. So we use volunteers as writers. Some of them distribute the newspaper for us. And our masthead was designed by a volunteer, just somebody from the community who wanted to help out. But you've also got to be conscious that you don't burn them out and take advantage of them too much. I think also, one of the advantages of being a hyperlocal, and particularly being in the digital area, is that your costs are actually pretty manageable. It doesn't cost a huge amount to start up a digital publication to keep it going. Our expenses last year were, only around about $12,000. So that's running the website. So it's manageable. I just started off Brunswick Voice initially just as a blog on Medium, as proof of concept before I then actually created the website itself. So that's another thing too, is just doing it step by step and not trying to do everything at once and be the biggest thing since Ben Hur straight away. I think I just want to give a shout out to Lena, because without Lena, I don't know if Brunswick Voice would still be around. And Lena is just an incredible organisation. The advocacy they do, organising things like the summit that we had a couple of weeks ago, where we get to meet other publishers who are doing the same thing all around Australia. And that's just so inspirational to speak to other people and to learn off other people as well. And there's so many services that Lena has helped to subsidise as well: insurance, IT help. We get access to AAP and photo services, the Broad Street advertising that Claire just spoke about. And there's no way we'd be able to afford those things if it wasn't for Lena. And also Lena's produced an incredible startup guide for startup publications, which wasn't around, and I wish it had been around when I started Brunswick Voice, but it's just a fantastic tool, and it doesn't pull any punches about some of the hurdles and some of the risks that you face as well. And I would recommend to anybody who's thinking about doing this kind of thing to definitely hook up with Lena and really dig into that startup guide. I had the advantage that I've had a long career in media and in journalism, and I have spoken to other organisations or other groups who want to do the same kind of thing, but they don't have any journalistic background, and it is a real that is some expertise that you really, if you can get somebody involved in your organisation from the start who just knows the basics of journalism, including the production side of it, not just the reporting, but the production side of it. I think that's really important. But the truth is that I've been subsidising Brunswick Voice for the last 5 years by working another job, and I don't really, we don't have anybody on the payroll really. We're now in a situation where I can spend 2 days a week working on Brunswick Voice, but the labour that I contribute would be for nothing each year to Brunswick Voice as an editor and a publisher and an ad rep and a sales guy and a paper boy distributing papers and a journalist and all these kinds of things will be, well into the 6 figures. So you've got to really have that commitment to do that. And we haven't been able to access government grants or government funding because the eligibility criteria just sets the bar too high for startups like us. But we have been lucky that we've, and we don't have DGR status, but we have been lucky that we've got a like-minded community foundation in our area who see that having robust local media can help deliver on their goals as well. So they've been good in providing us with some philanthropic money to help us keep going. And our revenue model is a real mixed model. Advertising is still there, but we don't have a paywall. Everything's free and accessible, and it always will be. But we have sort of what you would call, I suppose, a membership model, where people, if they've got the financial wherewithal, can make a regular contribution on a monthly or an annual basis, maybe just $10 a month. But that's really important. And also it gives people a feeling that they also have shared ownership of the publication in that way. So it's a mission, not just for myself, but it's something that the whole community can play a part in keeping it going.
Fantastic. And very briefly, Mark, as a follow-up question on this, what's the feeling that you get from your local community? What do they tell you when they know that you're the creator of the Project Voice?
Well, they definitely tell you when you get things wrong. But no, the overall feedback is, thank God there's somebody doing this. Thank God we've got a source of local news. There's a lot of people who, even though we're a digital first publication, a lot of people who still also love just getting a newspaper in their hands as well, to be honest. But yeah, it's just, and even when we write stories that are, critical of the council or covering things the council may not like the way we've covered it or that it's been covered at all, there's an appreciation, I think, even there that what we're doing is important for democracy, it's important for community, and that information is so important. So I've never had somebody come up to me and say to me, what you're doing is a horrible thing and you should stop doing it. But people will hold you to account. And I think that's one of the great things about being a community level publication too, is that you're accountable to your readers, and there's a transparency there that doesn't exist at the big news organisations where I've worked in the past.
Thanks again, Mark, for sharing that story as well. Over to Sarah now to ask her, given that New Zealand is a small market, trends may emerge more quickly or visibly. And are there any early signals or innovations that you think larger markets should be paying attention to, Sarah?
Cool. Thanks, Miguel. Another great question. And I think, again, just that learning, we've heard some really great examples of how like different revenue models can work for different media outlets. I think one of the really interesting things that struck me about Brunswick Voice was that hyperlocal focus. I don't think we have anything in New Zealand that really speaks to that sort of model of because we had the same thing, community papers kind of just up and left, and those small communities aren't really left with any sort of media outlet. So I think we could learn something from that aspect of creating a few more of those little, more startups in those local communities. That's just a little aside though. To answer the other question, I think one thing that's seen quite a lot of strength in New Zealand is that kind of membership model that adds value for the reader. So Margie spoke to that as well, like with ads that come on the conversation that actually add value to whatever the story or whatever the reader needs. And I think quite a few independent outlets are doing that same sort of model here in New Zealand. And I think that translates really well in terms of growing trust with the reader. And I think that's something those larger outlets can really take on board. To give some examples, there's a couple of outlets in New Zealand that the Spin-Off and another one called Shit You Should Care About, that they do partnered content, but it will always be in a way that delivers something for the person. So while it might be a brand partnership, the brand partnership is sponsoring really informative content. For context, I did one with the Spin-Off a few years ago that was sponsored by the pad company Libra, and it was all about period health. And I wrote a couple of pieces for them on period health and menstrual health and that sort of thing. And that was something that, while it had sponsored content, sponsorship behind it, it was still a really valuable proposition to anyone reading it. And I think that's something that's done really well in New Zealand, and could be kind of taken on board in larger markets.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Very interesting. And we're looking forward to learning more about these small but impactful media organizations emerging in New Zealand. That's what the mapping is all about, and why we approach these media organizations to be included in the directory, and at the same time connect them with similar organizations across the world. Now, one last question to Sane before moving forward. Some questions from our attendees, if there's any. Sane, based on the data, we're still misunderstanding about what actually makes independent media sustainable.
Yeah, I mentioned it before also that the context really is very important, right? So, and it's actually, I also want to say it's so great to be part of this panel because just even though we all know that the struggle is real, as Mark is also highlighting, I think it also fulfills us with so much joy to be part of the independent media landscape around the world, especially if you see the status of the world at the moment. So it's really nice to start my day with a discussion about independent media and a lot of hooks also to connect to in what the others have been contributing already. So yeah, if you look at sustainability, there are so many different formats, right? I even like what Sarah was just mentioning about the spin-off in New Zealand. We're actually going to highlight them in one of our next newsletters in the coming months. So do also subscribe to Sustainable Connections, and I'm sure Data will share the link. But it is also, we also want to highlight these case studies because sustainability looks different in different regions and for different platforms as well. So yeah, that's, I think, important to say. It's also, sometimes we do assume that if a platform is for profit, then it must be also sustainable and not fragile anymore, which is not the case. Or if we say, oh, people or platforms diversify their revenue, they can still be very unstable because it's not necessarily, you know, it still is often a hustler game, so to say, where you need to add different revenue sources to make ends meet. So, and then we see growth can be great, but it doesn't necessarily also give you security. And that ties into the sensitive areas that some of the media exist in. So in the African context, we see less advertisement than in Australia, New Zealand. In Europe, there is this, that I mentioned already, there is a huge grant funding system. And it was interesting that Mark said that they're not always eligible for grants. So I think what we want with Project Oasis, Global Project Oasis, is also making visible to funders what are the needs of the media in certain regions, right? So I think what Mark's point is very valuable for funders also to understand, okay, if Brunswick Voice is not eligible, what can they do to make it eligible, or what other funding can be created to help media like that. So I think that's also an important aim for Global Project Oasis. And we do see that membership models are popular, but then, and that also has been mentioned, trust building is really important. So you do always need to connect with the community if you set up a membership model. And then we talk a lot about trust building and community building in this ecosystem of digital native media, but I also see that it's so hard. You know, it's not an easy practice to create a community, and that's okay. But it's also something that can be more supported. Even how do you build a good community? What does it take? And membership models are often quite time intensive as well. So the data is really valuable, and it helps us move beyond the one-size-fits-all thinking. If we look at the context, and to make more context-specific decisions, we really need to look at the different regions, and within the regions also at the different models. And the beauty of the global project is that a media from Australia can learn from a media in Colombia maybe, or Germany, or so you can also look at the at the different models of the media organizations in other countries and see how they approach their sustainability.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Sane. That was a wonderful and fantastic conclusion to this panel. And I would like to thank everyone once again. And I would also like to invite everyone to virtually applaud to all of our panelists today, and many thanks to all of you who have joined us today. Fantastic contributions and conversation. And once again, drawing on Sane's invitation to download the report by visiting our website, globalprojectoasis.org. So you can explore the directory, and finally, an invitation to subscribe to our newsletter, Sustainable Connections. You can also follow the amazing work on social media by all the organizations that have joined us today. In our case, you can find us as Project Oasis and SembraMedia in the different social media platforms. And once again, thanks for your time and attention, and we look forward to connecting with everyone here in the future. All the best, and we'll keep in touch.